Good morning / good afternoon to everyone here. Of course, depending where you're joining from. Welcome to our guest speaker today, Karen, who I'm sure will have excellent information to share in terms of the Debt4NatureSwaps and biodiversity credits, et cetera, the program that she's been working in. But before I go through the official introduction, it is my pleasure to also acknowledge the presence of the chair of the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund, Ms. Karen Panton. Welcome, Karen, and so happy that you're able to join us. So with that being said,
thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. With that being said, again, a good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this edition of CBF's LINKup program, where we connect across the region to exchange learning, that's the L, insights, that's the I, and networking and knowledge sharing, that's the N and the A. So it is one of our knowledge sharing programs that we do here at CBF, and it is my pleasure to host and moderate this meeting today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Tadzio Bervoets. Again, I will be serving as your moderator today. I am the technical officer with the Bluefin project, which basically means that I'm the project lead for the Car Bluefin project. The Car Bluefin project is funded by the Global Environment Facility and implemented by the United Nations Environment Program and executed by us here at CBF. And the project specifically is designed to support the implementation of sustainable blue economy activities and also to mobilize funding for the conservation of coastal and marine resources in the Caribbean. And specifically, our objective is to create and strengthen nature-based blue economy opportunities and approaches through innovative financing mechanisms. And the way that we aim to do this is through implementing tools such as sustainable financial mechanisms, including regional blue carbon facility, blue team financial products such as virtual payment hubs for accessing marine protected areas, blue credit cards, reef risk insurance facility, etc. But of course, just as important as the sustainable financial instruments is that the project is also building a community learning within the context of conservation finance and within the context of blue economies to basically ensure that stakeholders across the region can exchange knowledge and lessons on the blue economy, on the opportunities within the blue economy, discussing financing tools, and of course, institutional experiences. This community will also be complemented by the Planned Blue Economy Hub, a digital platform to make resources, data, and best practices available across the region. So together, these efforts ensure that innovative financing is not only available, but also practical, scalable, and aligned with our shared goals for conservation and resilience in the Caribbean. So with that context, today's session focuses on Debt4NatureSwaps, which is a financial arrangement where a portion of a country's debt is exchanged for commitments to invest in conservation and sustainability. Globally, these swaps have directed millions of dollars into protecting ecosystems. And for the Caribbean, where we do have high debt burdens and a significant climate vulnerability, which often go hand in hand, they as in Debt4NatureSwaps do provide an opportunity to align economic stability with sound environmental stewardship. At the CBF, we see Debt4NatureSwaps as part of the wider toolkit in terms of innovative mechanisms, including under initiatives such as Bluefin. But today we have the pleasure of having Karen Panton with us, and she will be sharing her experiences and additional information in terms of the landmark 2024 Debt4NatureSwap in the Bahamas, which I think is very safe to say stands as a significant milestone for both the country and the wider Caribbean region. And just to note that Karen Panton is also a very active member of the project steering committee under the Bluefin project. So we're very happy to not only have her join us here today, but we also appreciate her engaged participation in the project steering committee. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Ms. Karen Panton, Executive Director of the Bahamas Protected Areas Fund, BPAF. As we have an introduction, I do have a bio for you, Karen. Karen is a
You
seasoned
can skip that and go straight into the heart.
No, we won't let you off the hook so easily. And I think it's important for the audience to know really the caliber of person that we have, that we're so lucky to have on our link up session here today. So Karen is a seasoned professional with a career grounded in financial and operational leadership in conservation. She has served as Director of Finance and Operations at the Bahamas National Trust, the Director of Finance for the Nature Conservancy's Caribbean Program, and Financial Representative for the Caribbean Challenge Initiative. She has also provided financial and accounting support to civil society organizations in the Bahamas and Jamaica. Academically, Karen studied at the College of the Bahamas and the University of Miami, Go Canes, and holds an MBA with a concentration in finance and accounting from the University of Liverpool. She now leads the Bahamas Protected Area Fund, which played a central role in the Bahamas 2024 Debt4NatureSwaps. So please join me in welcoming Karen. We are very lucky to have her on this session today, and we're very excited to have a discussion, fireside chat. Just in terms of housekeeping, I do have a few questions to help start off our discussion, to help sort of set the scene. And then we do ask that if you do have any questions, when we do open the floor for the Q&A session, to either put your question in the chat. I will ask for my colleagues to help with that, but also feel free to raise your hand so that we can give you the word so that you could ask the questions. And please don't be shy. Debt4NatureSwap is really an emerging sustainable financial mechanism that has huge potential for the region. So we do ask you to ask as many questions as you can, be as engaged as you can, and to make use of the opportunity that we have someone of Karen's caliber joining us here today to give us the information as to how the Debt4NatureSwap program or project went for the Bahamas. So with that, I suggest we dive straight into it. And then in terms of sharing the context, Karen, to begin with, from your perspective, why was the Bahamas' 2024 Debt4NatureSwap such a significant milestone for the country and for the region's conservation landscape? So if you can just give us a little bit of a background as to the process involved in terms of getting the Debt4NatureSwap going, and why is it such a significant milestone, not only for the Bahamas, but also for the wider Caribbean region? So,
sure. And first, thank you for that generous and very kind introduction. Good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. Let me just say that although the Debt4Nature, or I should say the debt conversion, appeared to have occurred very, very quickly, as a matter of fact, it did once the actors came to the table. It took about 3 iterations, 3 approaches by the Nature Conservancy and others for the government to get into a place where it felt that it was ready, because the Bahamas had no long-term debt facility or regulations or the framework to basically grasp and I wouldn't want to say understand, but to execute a debt swap at the time. The government was also concerned that this type of facility, if it was not properly packaged, communicated, would sort of convey the wrong message that the Bahamas was struggling with its fiscal responsibilities. Having gone, I guess, or having in 2024 satisfied itself that it had organized all that it was needed and it was ready, BPAF was, of course, invited to participate in this. And its significance has to do with the overall dollar value, $124 million over 15 years, significant, almost tripling the amount of funds that is available, particularly for protected areas in the country. No small feat when you understand that because of successive hurricanes and because of other global financial issues like COVID-19 and the 2008, 2009 financial crash, the Bahamas has been struggling with funding that is necessary for conservation. So this is a very, very big deal. It's a very big deal because it also provides that very much needed capacity, not only in NGO communities, but also within those government agencies mandated for the regulations, for the development, and the protected of agencies. It also has funding set aside for communities, and I could certainly share on this a lot later. But communities for supporting capacitation of those local community-based organizations, for helping with livelihoods opportunities. It also supports the recovery and the management of certain marine ecosystems like mangroves and so forth. So it's a very encompassing sort of big deal. And we were very, very pleased to be a part of this. And I think it also, as I mentioned earlier, because it forced or encouraged the government to look at long-term debt management in the country. I think this, along with other countries like the Belize and like the Barbados, will certainly begin to encourage other nations to look at the possibilities of these innovative structures. Debt conversions have typically been seen as very, very complex agreements, and they're not, and they're that. I mean, the number of lawyers we've had working on the deal has been maybe triple others who have been working on this. But at the same time, I think it gives other countries the courage to know that there is funding beyond the traditional and usual grants and donations. There is, with the right willingness and the right technical partners and the right funders, right opportunity, there is a lot more that can be done. I'll leave it there for now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Karen. And I think, the rest of the attendees will join me in giving warm congratulations in the work that you have been doing, because we do recognize that it is no small feat to enter into a project like this, and we really want to give our congratulations in making it such a success.
Can I say, Tadzio, maybe if I'm being honest, and I want to give kudos to those organizations who really helped us. And if I may, let me first start with the Nature Conservancy. I believe that having had the Nature Conservancy on our board, a representative on our board, and being willing to work with some of the science-based strategies that the Nature Conservancy uses. And I also believe being a part of the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund and its mandate that all of the conservation trust funds who are receiving funding through these partnership agreements must abide by best practices for conservation trust funds as prescribed by the Conservation Finance Alliance. I think that was helpful for us because the debt swap funders and partners insisted that a conservation trust fund is at the table. Normally, in the case of Belize, I think, as well as in the case of Barbados, a conservation trust fund had to be established. BPAF was already established, already abiding by best practices. That's not to say that we didn't have some issues, of course, but because we were there, because we were already abiding, because we already had the relationship, the governance, and so forth, the administrative structure, it was simply easy to then say, again, with the support of the Nature Conservancy and others, like in the Office of the Prime Minister, the National Designated Authority for Climate Change and other matters, environmental matters, she's also on our board. So we had all of these type of components and variables already working for BPAF. So we were able to use those to kind of propel us in that place where we had a seat at the table and were able to negotiate and say, this is what we want. We knew we had a certain amount of capacity gaps. We knew that the who we needed in the office to help support an agreement of this size and a commitment of this size. And so we were very, very well positioned, I think, to move ahead.
Great. Excellent. And that actually is a great segue into my follow-up question, because especially in terms of the conservation finance program of CBF and the involvement of the National Conservation Trust Funds, I think it would be good to maybe do a little bit more of a deep dive into how BPAF became involved in the process. Was were you approached for this? Was it a proposal that came out of BPAF? So maybe if you can give a little bit more of an explanation as to how that process.
So actually, and this is very interesting. So when I heard that there was this talk, because my understanding is the government approached, one or two of the funders and says, hey, we're ready. We believe this would be an ideal project for us to execute, both for fiscal management as well as conservation. So again, it was just a ripe opportunity. And I believe when the initial conversation started, I was actually at a CBF meeting, and Karen McDonald may remember this. I said to her, hey, I'm so excited because I believe we're going to get a debt swap for BPAF. And she and I actually sat on one of the first calls that we had with the Nature Conservancy's office responsible for conservation, these types of conservation agreements. And we were talking through what this would mean. And, and from there was this capacity assessment that, of course, the Nature Conservancy and IDB required. And it was just so exciting because we had already done 2 assessments mandated by the CBF, one on governance and one on a regular or general organizational institutional capacity. And so when it came up, I said to myself, we're going to breeze through that. And it wasn't quite a breeze, but it was certainly easier. So again, I think it's because BPAF was in existence. We've been around, operational from 2017. We had completed the Hurricane Dorian emergency grant. We had a lot of experience with that, with how to manage, grants administration and management. We had information on all of our key partners. We had built that history. And so I think when the Nature Conservancy, IDB, and others were working with the government, they were able then to pull all of that information and say they would recommend BPAF. It's kind of a natural marriage. So there was some dating still required.
Great. No, excellent. And I think really the role of the National Conservation Trust Fund cannot be understated. I think yes. In terms of readiness and in terms of organizations that have structures in place to be able to handle yes. A project like this, I think it really showcases the importance of the National Conservation Trust Funds to the region and through implementation of these type of projects.
Yeah, Tadzio, I'd also say there may be, and I'm sure we'll get to this point, but when we were approached, we were asked whether we would support the financial and the fiduciary management of the project, which is beyond simply receiving funds and dispersing funds. It's making sure that those conservation commitments that the governments, because the funds can support both governmental agencies as well as nonprofit entities, NGOs. So our role is to make sure that there are work plans, and there are work plans that actually say this is what we intend to do, like a log frame, and this is the activity. Our role is to make sure that these persons who are receiving funds actually do what it is that they're required to do to move the needle, because they're conservation commitments, some of which is a national mangroves plan, a marine spatial plan, those sorts of things. So we want to make sure when we're dispersing funds, it's not for some feel-good type of activity, but that this money is actually going to move the needle. And one of the staff members that we were required to actually hire was a monitoring and evaluation person. Very difficult to find locally. And so working with a monitoring and evaluation expert hired by the IDB, we then decided we'll hire a very capable person and then have them trained in monitoring and evaluation. And that is where we are right now, training up a very capable young woman so that she can go out there and make these assessments and evaluations.
Great, excellent. I do want to do a quick pause just to acknowledge the presence of our Caribbean Biodiversity Fund CEO, Karen McDonald-Gale, whose birthday it also is. So everyone, please join me in wishing Karen a warm, happy birthday. It is a off day today, so we're also very lucky to have Karen on the call with us. So welcome, Karen. Yeah, very interesting in terms of sort of the readiness. And I think, based on what you've mentioned, especially in terms of CBF involvement, I'm really wondering how, in terms of the relationship that you've had with CBF for the past years, what were some of the foundations that were laid to be able to be a part of a project of this magnitude? in terms of governance, in terms of stakeholder engagement, just general institutional readiness, which may also, lay the foundation or guide some of the other national conservation trust funds that are part of the architecture to be able to potentially also consider a project like this.
Yes, of course, absolutely. So I would say that because the CBF has always had been committed to training, been committed to making those investments in areas where there were issues that they may have noted, whether it's capacity, whether it's investment training or whatever of the sort, governance. Each of the conservation trust funds are yearly expected to do this assessment. Remember, I had mentioned the best practices for conservation conservation trust funds. Because we were committed, and again, of course, working very closely with each of our boards, because we were committed to ensuring that even though we are a small organization, and we still are a small organization, the financial integrity, organizational capacity, organizational mission and drive were always important, always supported by the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund. I could say to our guests, the number of trainings, the number of conferences, the number of interactions, the monthly meetings, and so forth have all been essential in getting us to that point where externals were saying to governments and, that this is an organization that has the credibility and the financial competence and strength to take this and actually make an input even to government agencies that we're working with. We're not only helping to support, we are also a resource to government agencies. And I think it's because from the very break, from I started with the Nature Conservancy, with BPAF, CBF has always been the driver, the motivator for ensuring that conservation trust funds improve. Conservation trust funds are at the point where they can independently as well go after, resource and resource management. So a lot of it has to do with that kind of baseline. You're operating by best practices and you're required to show improvements year by year. And I think that made it much easier for us to get ahead. And I can tell you, and I've heard this from good sources, we have actually given out a full payment, I should say a conservation disbursement. We've made our first disbursement both to NGOs and to the government within our first year of operation. And I am told that we are one of few conservation trust funds that have done that. So we're on a roll. I mean, as I mentioned before, we had the capacity, we had the systems, we have an excellent board. Again, we have I'm sure we have the commitment of the CBF because I've had a couple of discussions with Karen and Tanya and says, I think we're doing this. And they were so excited, especially Karen, like, yes, this is good stuff. And I think with that support that we've gotten from CBF, from TNC, from the board, even from the government, it has really made this project very, very special. And it's not without its challenges now, but the level of effort has been, well worth it.
Yeah. And in terms of the challenges, I mean, I don't want, to shed too much of a negative light, but I do think it's important that people also realize that, it's an involved and oftentimes complicated process, and there will inevitably be some challenges to overcome. So I was just wondering if you can speak to some of those challenges and some of the things that BPAF has done to overcome some of those challenges.
Can I be, all right, so I need to ask you if I could be honest first, and then I need to ask.
Most certainly.
So this has not been a walk in the park. This has certainly not been a walk in the park. It has been a learning process. The conservation agreement that we signed, so the government, BPAF, funders signed an agreement, does not and cannot cover all potentialities. There are things that you would have thought that you've covered, and then all of a sudden, one small area of a teeny area becomes a problem. For example, recently we had a requirement for one of our partners to complete an agreement, and the partner felt that the conservation agreement was, the full and complete authority, and BPAF held its position and said, no, you do need to have this other agreement that covers disbursement of funds. And it took a long time. It took multiple lawyers. And at one point, I thought we were, we had reached this, the stall in the process. And I was like, oh, the whole project is in danger. But we got through it. And we got through it because we finally decided, look, the project was just too important. The relationships were just too deep and meaningful for us to go sideways. So we worked through it, and we got to the point where we all felt that we had something that was workable. These things will happen until you get to that point where you can settle down and trust, your counterparts in government and in NGOs and so forth. So I would tell you that was the greatest challenge. Those little bitty things that pop up and that people say, oh, well, the CA is the governing agreement. We don't need to do anything else. And we're saying, no, BPAF has its own policies and procedures that we must abide by. I would say to anyone, make sure that conservation agreement spells out exactly what it is that you'd want to see. Don't make any assumptions. Be as deliberate and specific as possible in that conservation agreement so that you're protecting yourself. And one of those is to make sure that you actually specify as a trust fund that you've got a grants framework on operations manual that agencies who are receiving funds must abide by. It may seem simple, but it's very helpful. They also get good legal representation, and not just any lawyer, but someone who is versed in environmental matters and versed in working with governments and versed in working with international parties. I think that also helps because there's a certain amount of learning that is required otherwise. I also believe that it is because BPAF had, as I mentioned, the history of working with grantees when we did Hurricane Dorian, and we were adamant about enforcing policies and making sure, I's were crossed and T's dotted. I think we had established ourselves as being an organization that was committed to proper and correct management. And as a result of that, when we would meet with partners and so forth, I think they were more willing to listen to us because we came from a position of strength, not from, this little NGO trying to exert itself. So a little bit of a challenge, for example, you're dealing with a whole government versus one small organization. But again, as I said, as you work together and that trust is developed, it's helpful.
Totally. And yeah, I totally agree and hear you in terms of having good legal support. I think that's critical and yes. Something which may not be considered enough in the wider conservation space in the region. But I do think good legal support and a good governance framework and a good sound governance basis, I think it's critical in order for this. But I also would like to mention that focus, tenacity, and drive, I'm pretty sure also played a major role in ensuring that you've arrived at the stage where you've arrived at for this particular project. I also wanted to
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay. I just want to allow you to finish your point, Karen. Then I see that our Karen McDonald-Gale also has a question. So please finish your point.
No, please.
All right. Well, then I would like.
Go.
Yeah, I would like to give Karen the word. So Karen, please go ahead.
Thank you, guys. Sorry, the birthday hat doesn't fit in the camera, so
happy birthday.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure and add a few words of insight. First, to say to Karen, of course, job well done.
Thank you.
I'm trying to remember when we first started discussing this. It's been years, and that was my other point, that it really, really is not a short haul process. That's the message to get across to the governments, to your own board, to your own staff, to anybody who is helping you with this process. It really does take a good while for everything to come together. Yes. The second is to give CBF a little bit of a plug. We had this discussion as well with Belize in our Conservation Finance Forum to Congress, and that's online on YouTube because the governments also spoke in that session. And I think that trust that Karen refers to with governments takes its own time. So I'm separating it from the time for the for the debt swap agreement. It takes its own time to build a relationship with the government. But it's important in particular for the National Conservation Trust Funds, because as we have been creating and molding them, the idea is that they play this exact role and help the governments. It's not a fight, it's not a competition. It's help for the national conservation movements in each of the countries that we're working in, and I think that's an important part. And then I'm going to take 2 more seconds to welcome our newest member of staff, who is the Chief Finance Officer at the CBF. His name is Barrington Lewis, who's on the call, but he comes from the Environmental Foundation of Jamaica, which is one of the very first regional Debt4NatureSwaps. So when he's ready, I am sure he will add 2 words. But I really just wanted to add my words of encouragement. And the idea behind this chat was to give the full and realistic picture of what needs to happen when we discuss debt swaps. And I will say it's changed from bilateral government to government to the setup that Karen has that involves a number of other partners. And I think it's important for us to understand that. And I hope that there are some questions on that process that we can field today. Thank you, guys.
Mm-hmm. Tadzio, may I also mention, and
Sure.
forgive me, I failed to mention this, but one of the things that I've also done and had to do and is to reach out to Belize, to Leandra, my counterpart in Belize, and to reach out to the Barbados Trust Fund, Gregory, and to get their viewpoints as well, and to get their thoughts on how they've managed certain tasks and difficulties and, certain of their documents. And there's no need to reinvent the wheel. I mean, it's always good to see what others have done and to build on that. And I want to say to them publicly, thank you for being such a resource.
Great. Thank you. And that actually answers one of my last questions that I had before we open up the floor to Q&A. That, just asking in terms of collaboration, in terms of reaching out, and indeed not to reinvent the wheel and to but to also use the lessons learned and the best practices from other organizations to help guide in the process.
Yes.
I think it's critical. And you are now, BPAF is now part of that pool of expertise that the National Conservation Trust Funds in the region can reach out to in order to get some more information or some guidance in terms of how these mechanisms can be implemented. Very, very quickly before we open up the floor to the Q&A, I think you mentioned a very important point in your opening remarks, is the role of community.
Yes.
I think often, especially in the conservation space, there is not enough focus on community involvement and community engagement, which is a critical part of ensuring that your conservation actions are effective when they're being implemented. So if you could just speak briefly to the involvement of the community, to sort of how that community angle plays in this particular.
Yeah, I cannot speak for the government as it relates to the organization of the CA and so forth, but I can speak to BPAF priorities on a call for proposals. I could say that, and I could shoot the call for proposals over if anyone wants to take a look, but we are committed to communities and community-based organizations. We are committed to helping communities work with marine protected areas and marine ecosystems in and around those communities to see how they can develop new livelihoods and new enterprises and new activities related to, the blue economy. We are committed to ensuring that communities understand and are better aware of some of those opportunities that are available in the blue economy space, whether it's related to sustainable tourism, fisheries, or even nature-based solutions, and being involved in these community efforts to restore mangroves and restore corals and so forth. But we are including them, and I think that's critical because there is a relationship, of course, between poverty and conservation. And the studies suggest, and we've seen it even in COVID, we saw where communities were going in these protected areas and extracting in some of these no-take zones. So I think it's important for the governments, it's important for us to realize that there can be no effective conservation unless we also deal with sustainable livelihoods, we deal with, sustainable development, and we are doing that. I'm just very proud. There was a point I know in my conservation life when conservation was strictly conservation, but now I'm seeing the switch to conservation for people. So, and I think that's very important.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Yeah, it's critically important, and thank you so much for those efforts. And again, huge congratulations on the achievement so far.
Thank you.
And thank you, of course, for those valuable insights. I think it's a good opportunity now to open up the floor for questions. Yeah. We have about 15 minutes, and I'm hoping to stretch that to 20 minutes. But to the participants in on the meeting, please, you're welcome to type your questions in the chat, or to use the raise hand function if you'd like to ask directly. And of course, I'll have to facilitate to keep the discussions balanced and flowing. So just checking to see, we have a question from Nayari Diaz, who is our technical officer on the core project, who's asking, considering the level of readiness required for debt conversion initiatives, which may be restrictive for small countries individually, do you see the potential for a consolidated DNS Debt4NatureSwap package for the Caribbean, through which some of the smaller states can participate if the interest was there, especially considering the thrust towards regional integration impact, which is a great question, Harry. Thank you so much.
It is a great question. I don't know if I'm qualified to actually answer that because there are so many things involved. A debt conversion, a debt swap is not just a conservation tool, it's a fiscal tool. And unless and until Caribbean governments or any regional government grouping is willing to embrace it, I cannot say that yes, that this is possible. I think it is possible. I think all things are possible. I think if you have a willingness to do it, I think if governments remain committed to making those investments that are needed to understand what the possibilities of a debt swap are and its potential, I think there may be more willingness. The one other thing I want to say, though, even before BPAF was approached by the government formally, we were already on a track to improve our capacity. We were asking to see, well, I should say whether we would accept and whether we would be willing to go on a readiness track for green climate funds. And we are in that readiness track right now. So even before we had signed the agreement, we had already developed our ESMS, our Environment Social Management System, which is of course related to understanding and mitigating risk in projects. So we were already looking at what is it that we need and what is it that will get us in that direction that's going to allow us to embrace these types of projects, not just debt swaps, but any type of innovative funding. And what I would say to conservation trust funds of small countries is, do not let your size limit you. Do a little investment. Conservation trust funds, countries tend to put all of their bags in one basket as it relates to conservation, but conservation has two sides, the implementation on the ground and the financing. What I've noted is a lot of organizations are investing heavily in the programmatic side, but are not investing adequately in the resource mobilization side, even conservation trust funds. And I think that is a huge mistake. We need to do a little bit more. We need to get bigger like Barbados, and make those types of commitments necessary so that even though we may be small, even though we may lack capacity, we still look at those advantages that will get us into that space. Barbados is doing the most incredible things: debt conversions, green climate funds, multiple, opportunities. Why are we not there? Our neighboring countries. We don't need to be embarrassed because we're not the first one out of the gate. We just need to hop on and see how we could use the learning from those opportunities to propel us, and get us a little further ahead. So I would say, if there's willingness, then I think we can move ahead. We have enough examples in the Caribbean, enough learning, enough institutional knowledge to know how we could move ahead and make certain jumps.
Great, thank you so much. And I do think I acknowledge the question asked by Maria Koistra and by B. Lewis, but I do think that Karen McDonald-Gale has a follow-up to what you said. So I'd like to give Karen the word so that she can add her intervention. So Karen, please go ahead.
Thanks, Tadzio. Very quick follow-up to say, Karen has said it the right way, that it is about the NCTFs reading the situation and figuring out how they work. But I didn't see any names, and I was going fast, from TNC, but to recognize that they have been doing debt swaps for a number of years across the globe. And so key partners that you involve in that debt process would be important. And indeed, I think they recently published a debt swap lessons learned. So I think there are some documents. I like the idea of a module. This is what you need, without a lot of details. And I do think TNC has some of the ingredients there as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And acknowledging that Maria Koistra from Together for a Better Good has a question, I would like to give B. Lewis the word before I go into Maria's question. So B. Lewis, please go ahead with your question.
Okay, so this is Barry Lewis, as Karen introduced me before. So I just wanted to add my 2 cents to the discussion. So thank you for the welcome, Karen, and thank you for acknowledging that I was on the call. I wanted to talk a little bit, though, Tadzio, if you give me some leverage, about the experience of the Environmental Foundation of Jamaica that Karen had mentioned before. So the EFJ was one of the first Debt4NatureSwaps that happened in the Caribbean, the English-speaking Caribbean. In fact, it was a Debt4NatureSwap that emerged between the government of Jamaica and the US government. And the difference between BPAT and the EFJ was that EFJ was started from the discussion. So it emerged out of the discussion. So they created the EFJ as a special purpose vehicle for which the funds can be utilized in the region. And we would say that that was one that gave latitude to the organization to do things a little bit different. The EFJ got 3 Debt4NatureSwaps, and the TNC was involved in 2 of them, right? I wanted to just add a couple of points to the discussion that debt swaps are really about relationship building, and it involves a lot of different actors. But since we have a lot of the trust funds on here who are already existing, we would like to probably talk a little bit about how the process may work for them. And what we have found is one of the first steps you need to take would be to identify the debt that your individual countries may have, and identify the countries with whom they have these debts, to see if those countries, you can do your own internal research, see if these countries are willing to do debt forgiveness or debt swaps for whether climate finance or whatever issues first. And if you see that these countries are amenable based on their past history, then now you can start reaching out to your governments, because you have to start reaching out to the different ministries. You have to start with your Ministry of Foreign Affairs, your Ministry of Finance, the ministry responsible for the environment, because you have to start building the relationship to see if the governments are now interested in going down that path. And once they have expressed that interest, then you can start the whole discussion with them. So in terms of a process, I would say start by doing your research to see if the governments that your individual countries have outstanding debt to would be willing to consider Debt4NatureSwaps. And then you proceed after that to building the relationships with the ministries and the different actors. Yeah, so that's just my initial comment. Thank you.
Tadzio, if I could add to that, I think
Sure.
It's also important to ensure that you've got potential creditors who could absorb or buy back that debt. And it's not only governments to governments, sometimes it's governments to external creditors. So there are a number of opportunities and a number of ways to reduce a country's external debt.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Barry. I promise that the next time B. Lewis shows up, I'll know who it is. My apologies for that. But I think it's also good to get that perspective, because you did mention during one of your previous comments, Karen, that it may also, well, entering into a Debt4NatureSwap agreement may also involve developing a special purpose vehicle, an SPV, specific to that. So it was good to hear Barry's experience in terms of how that went in Jamaica. We do have some folks from TNC joining us. So thank you so much, Anika, who mentioned that she will share some of the feedback with the conservation team. And then we also have a message from Jim Tolisano, who in the chat has provided a resource in terms of a recent publication from TNC that provides a good introduction and approach for converting debt to finance for nature. So thank you so much for putting those resources. And then now to the question from Maria from Together for the Better Good, who's asking this transaction, as far as I could see, has a unique mix of guarantees and credit insurance. What was the biggest innovation in the risk-sharing design? And do you see that becoming a blueprint for future sustainable finance deals?
I'm sorry, I must say that BPAF has been a part of the conservation agreement. We were not a part of the financial agreement, with the government and its funders and those insurance and credit agencies. We do know that one of our directors, Builders Initiative, is actually a representative, of course, is on our board, but we do know that they provided a guarantee. What those unique details are, unfortunately, I'm not aware. Those were a totally separate agreement. Apologize.
No apologies necessary. I think it's also interesting to show or to explain how the different agreements, how they work and how they're relevant to a project such as this.
Yes, I would have loved to have been a fly on the table on the wall, so I can know. All I know is that the government, the arrangement was for $300 million of debt that was repurchased at a more attractive rate, and out of that, can you imagine, 124 million available for conservation on the ground? I think that's extraordinary.
Yeah,
extraordinary. Once we ensure that those conservation commitments and milestones are achieved.
Yeah, absolutely extraordinary. We are getting to the end of our session. I am just checking to see if there are any other burning questions that we would like to ask Karen. Just checking the chats, checking to see if any hands are raised. If not, then I would thank Karen for your excellent and valuable insights. I would like to ask if you can share a brief final reflection before we close off the session. So any final words, final thoughts, final recommendations or tips for those of us who are considering entering into.
Well, let me just hope that nobody reports me to my government, or I'm just kidding. No, I think just having a great board. Conservation trust funds tend to have boards that are disproportionately leaning towards programmatic activities and so forth. But I think it's really critical that we also realize that we are sustainable finance mechanisms, meaning our objective is to raise funds. So while we do give grants, and the grants are a means of getting the funds up the door, we need to make those investments in capacity for managing, dealing, engaging with these types of innovations. And I believe that more needs to be done in that area. But I'm very pleased that that these types of arrangements are becoming more commonplace. Barbados, Belize, Bahamas, Jamaica. We just need the learning, and we need to be encouraging our governments to not see these as potential risk that opposition leaders may use, for their own advantage, but to see them as the means to really elevate the level of finance for conservation. We are saying that unless we've got effective conservation, effective management, our survival is at risk. And so we need to be doing all we can to mitigate that. I'll leave that there for now.
Great, thank you. And we have one last question. I'm going to allow I'm going to read out one last question. So what is your biggest challenge in your control environment of the execution of this task?
The biggest challenge was for me, and what keeps me up at night, is determining whether we've got the right performance indicators that we're managing. One is getting the staff in place, and we now have the staff in place, a lean staff, but one I think that can manage, and ensuring that we are managing, that the government is managing, that so that when we're reporting on our impact, we're reporting in our 5th and 10th and 15th year, we can actually say that impact was completed. Other things are more manageable. Those key performance indicators, those measurements, the granular level of detail that's necessary to track, those things worry me a little bit. But I believe that the partners are coming together and sitting together and having those discussions to unearth areas that may be opaque or a little ambiguous and really bringing them down to something that's smart and manageable. I think that for me was the worry. And me getting our hands around that.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Karen. From my side, my final word would be that I'd like to emphasize that Debt4NatureSwaps, while they may be complex, they do represent an important tool for the region, especially when paired with strong institutions like our National Conservation Trust Funds, and of course, through complementing with other sustainable financial mechanisms, these can significantly strengthen both conservation financing and resilience across the region. So on behalf of CBF, thank you so much, Karen, for sharing your expertise.
Absolutely.
Thank you to all participants for joining us. I do have a few resources that I'd like to share. So within the chat, Tanya also shared, our conservation finance manager, Tanya also shared a resource specific to the discussion that we had on Debt4NatureSwaps during our recent conservation finance Congress. She has added the YouTube link there. Our communication specialist, Renee, urged everyone to learn more about the CBF through following the link that she placed into the chat. And Karen McDonald-Gale has also, Karen McDonald-Gale has also urged everyone to follow us follow CBF on our social media platforms. Renee has placed those links in the Renee has placed those links.
Erin, you can hear me?
Erin? I think Erin was trying to say something. So you can follow the social media links that were shared within the chat as well. Before we leave, I would like to urge everyone to do the session evaluation form. And with that, thank you again so much, Karen, for joining, and thank you so much to everyone for being able to join us today on this session. So have an excellent day further. I think it's Thursday, so it's not too early to wish everyone a happy weekend. And we look forward to the next LINKup session. Goodbye.
Thank you, Tadzio. Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.